Hello my precious little dragons, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this is your first time here, hello, my name is Callista and this channel is primarily focused on books with some beauty thrown in here and there. So today I am going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag. This is a generally bookish sort of tag. You will generally see it around June or July in the booktube community, and this year I'm participating because I meant to do it last year and then I forgot. Fair warning, I am bad at choosing just one thing, so you will be hearing multiple things about multiple books per question, so that's your heads up. Number 1, best book you've read so far in 2020. Prior to Lake Controversy that came around literally less than a month after I first read the book, I would have said The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, because I adored that book. I loved it. My whole heart and soul was in that book. And then we found out it was inspired by, in addition to some other things, it was inspired by the 60s scoop in Canada where Indigenous children were taken from their families and forced into residential schools. And obviously it was just not okay. It's caused a lot of controversy in the book community, and we're not going to unpack that here because this is not nearly a long enough video for that. And I am planning on actually doing a book look, and I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into my thoughts on the book in general, and then how my opinions have been shaped or changed from finding out the inspiration of the novel. And in the meantime, I would encourage you, if you're curious to learn more, Jess Owens in her book community videos always has a really good sort of concise overview, but I would also highly encourage you to look up what Indigenous book reviewers are saying and how they are responding. Obviously, no one is a monolith, so every reviewer, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, is going to have a different sort of viewpoint on how hurtful it is that this was the inspiration of the book and what to then think about the book after that, or whether to talk about it. But because of that, and because it has shifted my viewpoints a little bit, I did also want to mention some of my other top runners for the best book I've read so far. And these are books I have equally raved about. Not so much on my booktube channel because I've been really bad at getting my book looks up this year and I apologize, but I have raved about them over on my Instagram. So if you follow me there, I'm much more active than I am here. And I have been posting mini reviews of every single book I've read so far. I say mini, they're not really that many. I constantly have to put the second part of the review in the comments, but that's aside the point. They're smaller than a book look. Here are the other books I have loved, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I loved them. So, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a stunning first part in a fantasy series. It is big, it is epic, it is a non-Western fantasy. Well, non-Western European-ish inspired fantasy, because it is in the West. It is South American inspired, pre-Columbus, so it is extremely interesting. The world building is fascinating, the characters are great, we have everything from fighting to political intrigue. I loved the dynamics of all of the characters. It was just a really, really solid, well done book, and I cannot wait for the sequel because it ended interestingly. There's a lot happening in that book. Next, Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. This is a YA sort of thriller mystery that is set in the Ojibwe and Anishinaabe community in Upper Michigan, and it is a brilliant book. The character work, stunning. The plot, intriguing. It wonderfully handles a lot of really, really hard, dark topics, including murdered and missing Indigenous women, including murdered and missing Indigenous peoples. It includes it covers drug trafficking, it also covers sexual assault and rape. It also covers topics such as mixing Indigenous and Western science and education, and it also has a little bit of a love story thrown in there, but somehow it balances it all. It's doing all of this stuff and it's still keeping you engaged. It's still fast paced. I stayed up till 5 a.m. because I had to finish this book. I stayed up till 5 a.m. I haven't pulled an all-nighter since undergrad, and I was like, you know what? I just need to finish this book. And so I stayed up till 5 a.m. and I have no regrets. It is an amazing book. Like I said, it kind of walks that line between YA and adult thriller, but it does it really well. Everything that was woven in there was done so beautifully. I would highly recommend that one. And then lastly, The Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. It is a lovely translated book, and it follows a cat named Nana and his human and they go on travels all across Japan, an initially unspecified reason that you learn throughout the book. And this one was just absolutely beautiful, and I usually don't like animals as protagonists, but this one was just done so well, and Nana just seemed like the perfect embodiment of a snarky cat. It worked. It just worked. And it didn't annoy me, which was awesome because, like I said, usually animal protagonists and me, they don't mix. But I just had a feeling going into this novel that I was going to love it, and I was so right. And I sobbed the entire last 4 chapters. It was so beautifully written. I mean, props to the translator. I believe his name is Philip Gabriel. Yes, I was right. Once my Japanese is better, I want to see if I can get a Japanese copy of the book because I want to try and read it in the original language. I still don't know if my Japanese is quite up to par for that. I kind of doubt it, but it's a goal I want to reach for because as much as I do love reading the translated fiction and that makes it much more accessible, like I do also just want to give that a try. It's like equal parts heartwarming and bittersweet, and it's just a lovely, lovely literary fiction. Next, the best sequel you've read so far in 2021. Alright, so technically I've only read 2 sequels and they're both part of the same series. So I have finished the Brown Sisters series. So I read both Take a Hint, Dani Brown, and Actor Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. And I loved both of them, but I love Take a Hint just a little bit more. And I think that's mostly because I connected to the characters in that one more. Like, they seemed more relatable to me personally. But I will say, if you're more of a humor reader, Actor Age, Eve Brown, laugh out loud funny. Like, I laughed a lot more with Actor Age than I did with Take a Hint. Take a Hint hit me more emotionally, but Actor Age was really, really funny. And also sweet and romantic. So for a new release you haven't read yet but want to, there's a lot of them. But I have a YA one I've chosen and an adult one I've chosen. So for the YA one, I've chosen Ace of Spades by Freakout Iyamide. It is a debut novel. It is a dark academia thriller inspired by Gossip Girl, and the author stated in an interview that she wrote it in 28 days, and she couldn't wait to write a Black Blair Waldorf. Personally, never watched Gossip Girl, but the premise sounded fascinating, and I'm a sucker for dark academia and YA thrillers. I tend to be able to do a little bit better than adult thrillers, just anxiety, suspense wise. So it sounds up my alley, and I mean the cover's gorgeous, right? Okay, and then for the adult novel, I am excited for Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutano, and this is also a debut novel. It is equal parts murder mystery, rom-com, and it also includes mother-daughter relationships and Chinese-Indonesian culture. It includes 1 accidental murder, 2,000 wedding guests, 3 maybe cursed generations, and 4 meddling Asian aunties to the rescue. And it just sounds like a blast. I'm so excited to read this one. My most anticipated release for the second half of the year is This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron, and it's Secret Garden inspired, has like some magical realism aspects and fantasy, and it just sounds like it's so up my alley, and I'm very ready for it. So number 5, my biggest disappointment so far. So I have 2 for this one for very different reasons. So the first one was unfortunately Goodnight Sweetheart by Pam Weaver. So I was excited for this one because it's a historical fiction with an interracial romance, and I was like, oh, this sounds really good. It takes place during / after World War II. And it just wasn't great. And by wasn't great, I mean it wasn't good. I struggle to say bad things about books. And part of what makes it even harder, and I probably should just do a dedicated review on it, but I'm not sure I'm the person that needs to make the review. But I also haven't seen like anyone talk about it, so I don't know. Let me know what you think. Basically, it takes place in London primarily, and a white British girl meets a Black American doctor who was part of the army, and they get married. And I mean, you knew it's an interracial romance set like in a historical fiction, so I mean, you knew in the back of your head there was going to be racism, but just the way it was handled in the book, it just felt like it wasn't, I don't know. I felt like it could have been portrayed much better. I do have like I said, a dedicated mini review over on my Instagram, so you can go read that there. I'm not going to get too much into it here, but I wanted to be very careful with how I said how disappointed I was in it, because I know part of it was, I know at least part of it was influenced by the author's own lineage and history. She was adopted and then found out as an adult that her father was an African-American GI that her birth mother had met during the war, and then he later died in battle. So part of me is like, well, I can't really speak to her personal her personal heritage, but I think part of it was just the way it was written. It wasn't portrayed well, and I think a lot of it had to do with like technical writing aspects, and even to some degree like the percentage of the book that focused on certain characters that made it even worse. And I think it came down to technical writing stuff, because you could tell the heart was there, you could tell she was like passionate about the book. It was just very disappointing. That wasn't good. If you want a dedicated review, I can try. I don't know that I'm necessarily the best person to do it, but as I said, I haven't really seen people talk about this book at all. I read it for a NetGalley. Hold on, when did it actually come out? Because maybe... Okay, yeah, it's been published since March 2nd. But I did notice most of the reviews of people I could, you know, see their pictures on Goodreads were also white readers like me, so I haven't really seen any biracial or African-American or Black British people review it. So if you know of any that have read this book, they would be much better to listen to than me for this specific book. However, I also think the way it was done could be really triggering too. So I also don't necessarily want to suggest that people read it just to make an own voices review on it, because I really do feel like there's multiple things in there that could be pretty triggering. Anyway, so I'm going to stop talking about that one. The next one that was most disappointing was for a very different reason. And it was The Revelations by Eric Hole. And this one I was really excited about because it's like adjacent to my field. It was written by like a neuroscientist. It was his debut novel, and it was like promising literary fiction meets murder mystery, and this book made no sense. It was so nonsensical and pompous and pretentious with long-winded, like I'm talking pages long passages of just like philosophy of the theory of consciousness that you wouldn't understand unless you also had a PhD in neuroscience with a specialization in the theory of consciousness. I mean, there were definitely much more mixed reviews on this one. Like, there was a lot of people who agreed with me that it didn't really make sense, and there was a lot of people that were like, this was a stunning work of literature and I adored it and it was so connecting to my soul. And I'm like, did you read the same book I did? Because it didn't make sense, and I'm literally a PhD student in an adjacent field, so I understood a decent amount of it. I understood the processes they were talking about and going through, and still a lot of it made no sense, like from a literary perspective. And so reading the reviews was almost more frustrating because the people who loved it, I didn't understand why they loved it, and I was like, what? And it also like didn't really have a conclusion. Like the murder mystery aspect of it just like dropped off. It's like, okay, but who actually did the murder? Was there even a murder? And there was this weird like fantastical element thrown in literally like the last 5 pages. It was just kind of a mess of a novel. And like the researcher is like a distinguished neuroscientist, so I respect his research, but I feel like this was not great for his first foray into fiction. Like, I wanted to love it, I did, but it was not there. It was not great. I struggled through this book for a month to just say I'd read it and get my NetGalley review up and not touch it again. Yeah. Alright, number 6, biggest surprise. This one I had trouble with because I'm generally pretty good about estimating my feelings about a book before I read the book. For instance, The Traveling Cat Chronicles, normally I don't like the animal protagonist formula, but there was just something about it. I'm like, I'm going to love this book, and I adored it. The only exceptions tend to be when something doesn't meet my expectations from like either a problematic or writing standpoint, but we just talked about that in Biggest Disappointment, so there's not really a lot of things that truly surprise me in a positive way. Take this answer with a grain of salt because I really had to think about it to try and figure out what book surprised me, but I ended up going with Malice by Heather Walter, and this is a sort of Sleeping Beauty retelling with a focus on the villain, whose name is Alice, and so she's, you know, your Maleficent character. So there's a lot taken from the original fairy tale, there's a lot taken from sort of like the Disney-ish Maleficent inspired, like you can see the influences, but it was just really well written. It's a really good dark book. The ending was really good. Like, it did a really good job of building intensity. Like, I knew I was going to like it, partially because I tend to like fairy tale retellings no matter what, but I really loved this book. It was extremely well done. And I think someone told me I think I heard someone say it's going to be a duology, in which case, heck yes. I thought it just ended on this kind of ambiguous note, but I mean, if it's a duology, hold on, I'm gonna check this because I literally just, yes, okay, it's a duology, sweet. Okay, so I'm actually really excited about this because I thought it was just a single book, and I was like, because the ending was like super intense, and I was like, oh man, I kind of wish there was more, like, but it seemed like a good ending regardless. So that makes me really happy because that says it's good on its own, but there's more to come, and I'm very excited about that. But just, yes, the romance done brilliantly. It had a lot of interesting commentary. It was just, the world building was interesting. I was just very happy with this book, and I would say that's probably the closest I would come to being surprised, because I'm pretty sure I gave it 5 stars, and like I was expecting it to maybe be in like that like 4-ish star range. So I mean, it's not a huge surprise because I knew I was going to like it, but still good. Alright, favorite new author, debut or new to you? This is number 7. All of my favorite books that I mentioned before, so Rebecca Rowan, Horace, Angelina Jolie, and Hiro Arikawa, and yes, TJ Clown, would all technically fit in here because they were all new to me authors. And favorite books, favorite authors, you liked the book, you like the author who wrote the book, so yeah, it's a pretty simple answer for that one. I haven't read a lot of repeat authors this year, or authors I've read before this year. Like, one of the few exceptions would be like I read Gail Carson Levine's new book, and I'm still reading Christopher Paolini's To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. I just haven't. I think sci-fi is just not for me. I think this is what I'm discovering. Sci-fi books are not for me because I'm just dragging through that one, and I don't think it's because it's badly written. I think sci-fi is just not my thing. I can watch it in a movie, I just can't read it in a book. Maybe the last 400 pages will change my mind. Okay, 8, newest fictional crush. So I have 3 options for you here. So we have Elias from An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, and I feel like he's just this really good combination of, like, obviously he's like tall and handsome and a competent fighter, so there's that like traditional aspect, but I love his like morality. He was raised in this literally brutal, cruel world, and he's still kind and has like, and watches out for literally like the lowest classes. Like, you know, he cares about the well-being of like slaves who he, all things considered, in his raising and his social standing, shouldn't care about, really not care about, but he does. And he's just such a good-hearted person, and I love him. I love him. I loved his chapters of the book probably more than anything because I also loved that morality dynamic. I loved how you saw his brain work and how he stood out from what he was raised in and how he had to grapple with that, because it's not like everything about him was, because obviously there was still some conflict in his heart. He wanted to fit in, he wanted to do this stuff, but he didn't at the same time. It's just the conflict that was written in there was really, really fascinating. Fine, from The Wolf or Yarrow by K.S. Veloso. This is somewhat similar to Elias, except that not as, I mean, he's competent, but more as a con man than a fighter, but he can fight, but he prefers just to con people. But he's a con man with a moral compass because he only cons because of like trying to watch out for his family and take care of them. But he's a very soft-hearted, good-natured person. The main protagonist is not the most likable human being, and he watches out for her regardless. He sticks his neck out for people he barely knows. He was studying to be a doctor, so he's got the big brains, he's got the smarts, so we love that. He's very, very thoughtful and caring, and I'm eventually going to read the second one, and I want him to live through the series. That's my hope, because actually both Sabaa Tahir and K.S. Veloso strike me as the kill your darlings type of writers who will not hesitate to kill your favorite characters. So what saves me for Ember in the Ashes is that I know that Elias is on all 4 covers. So that's helpful. Or at least I think it's Elias on all 4 covers. K.S. Veloso, it's only the main character on all the covers. So you don't know if Kyne's gonna survive. He's on the chopping block. He could die because I love him. Anyway, last but not least is Dani Brown. And from Take a Hint, Dani Brown. And she is just... Again, we have the big brain energy. She's a PhD student. I connect to her on so many levels. But she also, if we're talking personality-wise, the intelligence grad student vibes, that's where I connect with Danny. If we're talking about in the book as a whole, I connect far more with Zoph. Like, he's far more close to my personality. But that means, like, you know, how Zoph and Danny match. I feel like I'd be a good match for Danny. She's very smart, very determined. She speaks her mind. You could listen to her talk about what she loves for ages and ages and ages. And yeah, like the whole book, I'm just like, I love this character. I love both of these characters. They're great. I would date either one of them, honestly. I mean, they're just top notch. Newest favorite character. I really adored Bhumika from The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. So I just finished this a week or so ago. And Bhumika is like one of the best political intrigue characters I've read in a while. Like, she's just pulling all of the strings, but in like this quiet behind the scenes way. The book has a lot of commentary on like misogyny and feminism and, you know, and sexism and stuff like that. So she's living in a very, very sexist society where she really has to like cultivate relationships and utilize them to her advantage. Like, even though she's in a privileged position, she's not in a position of power. She didn't let it slow down, it didn't stop her, but she also still had like those normal like expecting mother worries of like keeping her child healthy and safe. But there's also like this other stuff, so you really get a lot of depth to her character, and I cannot wait to see where that character goes. Like, some of the other characters I had more mixed feelings on, but Bhumika I loved the entire way through. I was always excited when her perspectives came up. Next is Leela from Arsenic and Adobo by Mia Pimansala. One of the reasons I love her is her character dynamics and relationships with other characters in the book. I love how you really see these different aspects of her depending on who she's interacting with. So when you see her interacting with her aunties, it's very different to when she's interacting with her best friend or her old hometown friends or the detective. You really see these different aspects of her personality come out, and you can tell how much she really, really cares about all the people in her life, and she just works really hard. You know, she may not be the best or the smartest, but dang it, she is dedicated and she will do anything to protect her family. And seems like a sort of perfect cozy mystery protagonist. So, I mean, for many reasons, I cannot wait to read the sequel of that book. But Leela is one of the reasons that I'm looking forward to it. And lastly, Evelyn Hugo from The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this one, Evelyn Hugo is like a perfect example of a morally gray character. Period. I feel like everything that I can say about her is kind of encapsulated in that phrase. She's a really good example of it in general. But then also one of the best examples I've seen of it in like a historical fiction / contemporary setting, because a lot of times I feel like you stick your morally gray characters in fantasies or in something like that, and a lot of times they're not women that are morally gray. You get your men who are morally gray characters. So she's just interesting all around, and everything she does, you understand her reasoning for it. Even if you don't necessarily like that she did it, you understand it. And I just really, really respect Taylor Jenkins Reid's ability to do a stunning amount of character work. And it really does encapsulate like how Evelyn Hugo was able to become the Hollywood star, and how she was able to keep and maintain her career and her secrets over several decades. So it's really just a fascinating, fascinating character study of a book in general. Obviously the book is named after her, so you know you're gonna focus on Evelyn Hugo. And she's just a really well done character. I can definitely see myself rereading that. Last question, number 10, book that made you cry. So I'm just going to list you the books that made me cry. The Traveling Cat Chronicles, I already mentioned. I sobbed through the whole last 4 chapters. I'm not going to tell you why, but I will just say it was an overwhelming variety of emotions. It wasn't just sad, it wasn't just happy, it was all of the emotions I was feeling all at once. And I sobbed. So there's that. If you want to sob, go read The Traveling Cat Chronicles. Next, I also cried during The House in the Cerulean Sea, but those were like feel-good tears. Next, I also cried during White Too Long by Robert P. Jones. This one was very different because it's literally talking about the history of white supremacy in the US Christian Evangelical Church. So that one I was crying, but because it was emotionally heavy, and Also, it's part of the ongoing series in my life of deconstruction, you know, where you're learning about a lot of things that you were brought up believing that have racist origins, honestly. And it's very tough, and there's a lot of things to learn about America and the church and yourself, and deconstruction can make you cry. But it's a necessary process if you want to go to reconstruction and having a better, more Jesus-like faith. So, you know, there's that. And lastly, Becoming a Doctor's Doctor by Michael F. Myers. I cried during this one for different reasons, because it's focusing on a psychiatrist who specializes in treating doctors as patients. That one was just a really, really compelling memoir, and I cried for a variety of reasons. Some of the stories he told were really sad, and kind of just shines a light on, you know, how perfect we expect doctors to be and the strain we put them under, and how they really struggle to live up to those standards that the world and they hold themselves to. And so there was a lot of just really heart-wrenching moments in that memoir, but also really uplifting ones, really understanding why he became passionate about that. And really, as a future psychologist, a lot of the things he was talking about apply to me as well, and really gave me sort of an understanding and compassion for that group that I may or may not treat at some point in my future. But if I do ever work with doctors as patients, I feel like I now have a better understanding and knowledge of some of the things that they go through. Alright, so that is my mid-year book freakout tag. So yeah, I would love to hear about your opinion on any of the books that I've mentioned, or what has been, let's see, what has been either a book that has made you cry this year, or if you cried reading books, what is the book you think would have made you cry? Because not everyone cries while reading. There, those are your two question options, because I think it's interesting. I need to end this. So, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. If you wouldn't mind liking, commenting, subscribing, all those YouTubery things, please feel free. Stay magic, keep reading, and I love you all so much. Goodbye!